She suggested I keep Anwar, the cook. He was an excellent baker, thus the need for vanilla. She didn't say much except that he was a Hazara, a Shiite. Meant nothing to me at the time. Now there are two kinds of language to learn in a new culture, the spoken language and the silent language. The silent language made up of our unconscious patterns and assumptions. Anwar and I bumped against those walled-off places in ourselves right away. Our first dinner party was for 30 Peace Corps nurses who were scheduled to work in the provinces. We used to call them the singing nurses. They eventually made up a song about washing patients without soap. I worked alongside Anwar in the kitchen, mostly concocting my first alcoholic punch. As we were finishing up, I thought he looked like he'd slept in his clothes. Of course, I learned later, Afghan houses were furnished with carpets and toe shocks, thin futons. You took off your shoes at the door. The toe shocks were arranged in daytime for sitting, eating, playing cards. At night, they were arranged for sleeping. You lay down and pulled a quilt over you. There was no such thing as pajamas. Finally, I said, I'll finish here. You can go change your clothes. Bossy American woman that I was. Anwar did not stop working, or nor did he look up. But he was very firm. Tomorrow you get new cook. I slipped away. Somehow I knew he would not stalk out. In the morning he waylaid Walter. Bob, the previous director, had grown up in Iran and spoke fluent Farsi, and Sherry must have left all servant problems to him. Anwar wept and said we were like mother and father to him. Walter had his hands full with his job. He basically told him, good, you take all your problems to mother. I don't want to hear them. At the end of the tour, he told me, if I had to worry about the family, I would have drowned. I knew you could look after the family. And I gasped, but he's a grown man. Then I realized that I had been promoted overnight from a twofer to a place of honor and respect, particularly as I was the mother of sons. Afghan women say that a woman with sons stands under a sheltering tree. Anwar and I had no other choice but to become a team. I asked his advice about things. He would always want to know what I paid for something I purchased, and then laugh and tell me what I should have paid. So he had really coached me to become a very good bargainer, so much so that a shopkeeper once said to me, Germany, Elspie? Are you German? And I said, no. Why do you think I'm German? Oh, because you're very sucked. So when I told Anwar, he laughed because suck is the word he used for meat, which was hard to cut. So when we needed a night guard to answer the garden gate and just to have a mail in the house during Walter's many trips back to Washington, Anwar suggested his nephew, Bakhtari, who looked to me to be about 17, 18 at the time. I felt like I'd acquired a teenage son, but Afghan culture recognizes no teenage. Anwar was worried about him having come so recently from Bamiyan to the big city of Kabul. So he asked me to keep him very busy with chores. But the boy was so smart and so energetic, I couldn't keep up, and he did get into trouble. Anwar was very upset. When he come to Kabul, boy, now man, but not good. There's a lot about Bakhtari escapades in the book, but there's no time to relate them now. I learned quickly that I must leave instructions in Farsi. Anwar was the only one of the three men in the house it took to run this household in Kabul that did what I had done single-handed at home, who knew any English. He was too proud to admit when he really hadn't understood, particularly in front of the other men who believed he was understanding. And when I got home and I was surprised and frustrated at the results, he'd say, but you say. If it had happened the other way around, that I had misunderstood, he would have said, Parwanese, it doesn't matter. Parwanese, along with Inshallah, if God wills it, were two expressions I heard somewhere every day. He naturally seemed to favor our oldest boy, Chris, who also loved to cook. Anwar had the time and patience to let him learn some tricks I never did. How to make pomegranate juice. I asked him recently, and he said, oh, you put the seeds in a silk stocking, there were no nylons at the time, and squeeze the seeds through that. I had trouble being supplanted entirely in the kitchen because the kitchen's my favorite chore. So I sometimes tried to sneak in the afternoon when Anwar was usually having tea with a friend in his room. But I came in and there he was, and he looked up as though caught in the act and said, Chris want cookies. One thing the children loved was his pizza, made from the dough available in every neighborhood non-shop that made the world's best flatbread. Anwar was from the Hazara, member of the Hazara tribe. His home village was Bamiyan in the remote valley where the giant Buddhas stood until being dynamited by the Taliban in 2001. The Hazaras are an ancient people and once made up the majority of the population. Popular thinking is they may be descended from the remnants left behind by the descendants of Genghis Khan. But in the 60s, they were moving to Kabul, building houses, pooling resources, and moving up the economic and social ladder. Anwar and a relative had just finished building a two-room traditional mud brick house. We all lived in them. But his was on a barren plain, not far from our house. Our neighborhood once looked the same way, we were told, before the wells were put in and the irrigated gardens. Just before Thanksgiving, his brother was getting married. I told him to take time off for the wedding celebrations, but be sure to make the pies ahead for our Thanksgiving dinner. Shortly before noon Tuesday, the groom appeared in his wedding clothes, ready to escort our whole family to the celebrations. But I was the only one home. Bakhtari forgot to relay the invitation. The two-room house was filled with women relatives. Anwar insisted that I eat first, of course. That was traditionally the most hospitable people in the world. And the wives sat beside me, waving the flies away. He had taken the course fashioned by the American women for cooks. A main feature was a film about the journey of the fly from human feces in the street to dining room table. I tried my Farsi on them and they laughed good-naturedly. Then I was led into the main room and seated on the only chair, a low stool. Everyone else was seated on the floor. How I wish I had known more about these people at the time, but my sole orientation for my position was reading James Michener's Caravans. Walter said he guessed the Peace Corps just had to trust to luck in their choices of staff. At a midterm conference, a young volunteer finishing his first year serving in the Hazara broke down and wept after listening to a man talk to them about his decades of living there. It takes time to penetrate an ancient culture. People will tell you what they feel you want to hear until you've had that third cup of tea. I felt I just scratched the surface in 22 months. But now I can click on Google and learn a few facts. The Hazaras have a distinct music of their own, do beautiful calligraphy and weave rugs, or at least they did for a time before all the wars. Still, there were many who were illiterate. I'd already noticed their women did not wear the shawgi. I particularly remember one beautiful young woman seated along the black wall in a long dress of green and scarlet. She spoke up an act with perfect poise and perfect English. Asked, "Did you bring a camera?" I felt like a fool, but I told the truth. The camera belonged to my husband. I never took pictures. At that time, one needed to use a light meter and set the setting and all that. Walter was the photographer. I was the storyteller. The bride, I guess, was about 15. Her hands had been painted with henna, and she had on beautiful outfit with silk pantaloons. Anna told me the groom had to buy 5 such outfits. She was very excited and nervous and frightened, trembling. She was trying to hide under her veil and had her back to the crowd. She was obviously a dutiful daughter from a loving family. Her mother, seated on the other side of her, was nursing an infant. The mother smiled at me and seemed to be happy that day. When I saw the bride a year later, she had her own infant and was working with one of the other women in the family, cooking a meal over the wood fire on the ground. How do they cook in winter when the snow is on the ground, I wondered. I saw that the large wooden crates our sea freight arrived in had been put to good use. One is a well covering, the other is a work table. When Anna and Abdulhamid had seen those crates, their eyes lit up. If I wasn't going to use them, could they have them? It was as if I gave them gold. I came to feel that Anwar and his nephew, to a lesser extent Abdulhamid, who Anwar confessed for who Abdulhamid thought him head not so good, became my extended family. Walter told his parents, Anwar loved Janice. He was hard-working, trustworthy, and kind. When Walter was out of the country, without my even asking, he would wait until Bakhtari returned from his dinner in the bazaar before leaving to go home himself. He just naturally seemed to fall into that protective stance. One of those evenings, Chris strode up to him and gave him a hug. Anwar's eyes moistened. I was surprised how emotional Afghans were. I was used to the buttoned-up old New England style. With winter coming on, we needed a fire in the evenings. Now you're going to find out where the title of this talk comes from. So when I left one afternoon, I gave instructions to light the fire at Chobajah, 4 o'clock. There was one problem. The word for fire and the word for sun were very similar, Oftad and Atish. And I used the wrong one. I had asked them to light the fire. The men began to laugh uproariously. Reb Saab wants us to light the sun! Light the sun! None of us ever forgot it. It was a magical moment.